All right, let's move on because we want to talk about the crazy notion that Eric Cantona was the greatest player in Premier League history. Daniel Harris, good morning to you.
Hello.
25 years ago today, Eric Cantona joined United. A few favourite bits, starting with the insouciant brilliance of this. That was a clip yesterday. And then 26 years ago today, not the greatest player in British football history, but try finding one more influential and decisive. Good luck, definitely the greatest player in British football history, you said. So that's you updating your tweet from last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I was joking about the greatest player in British football history, but
not really. A little bit.
I was joking. He's not a better player than George Best or Ronaldo or numerous others, I suppose. But in terms of his influence, and I don't just mean all the bollocks that we hear about the class of '92. I mean, when it actually comes down to what Phil Leotardo would call brass tacks. He played in England for 6 years, I think it was. And probably what he did at Leeds in helping them win the title is overplayed, but he did win the title with Leeds that season. He then turned up at United halfway through the next season and made the difference, and they won the league. Then they won the double. Then they probably would have won the double, but for the fact that he booted Matthew Simmons. Then he came back and they won the double again, and then they won the league again, and then he retired, and then they didn't win the league. And I don't really think that anyone can compare with that, as in, when he plays, they win things, and when he doesn't play, they don't win things.
Yeah, it's not bad when you draw it out like that. You were at the Crystal Palace game, Sellers Park, that night when he jumps into the crowd and kicks Matthew Simmons, were you?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I was. I guess in its way, that was a seminal moment in my teenage years where I was 15 years old trying to work out what was going on. Obviously, still have no idea, but I was at least trying to find out. And where you see someone do something like that, and it's someone like Eric Cantona, and you're already walking about school with your collars of your blazer up and 7 Cantona chalked on your back and all that kind of ludicrous behaviour, to see someone give the message that be true to yourself in every circumstance, that was quite thought-provoking and influential and inspirational in its way. And if I was picking my favourite Eric Cantona moment, despite the goals in cup finals and the goals in big games, the goals in derbies, it's definitely that one.
You're a Man United fan?
I am. I actually went to see Eric Cantona in the Olympia recently.
Oh yeah, was it any good?
He was doing a speaking tour. He did 2 nights in Olympia. It was very good. The night as a whole wasn't great, but his interview was really good, and he was funny.
Tom Dunn did the interview?
I'm not sure who the guy was. No, it was a guy from Scotland.
Okay.
And he was funny, charming, intelligent, witty, and he was asked about the kick, and he said he loved it. I loved it. I would do it again. And that's all he said. He said there's no place for hooliganism in football, and that's all he said about it. But he got a great cheer from the crowd. You know, it was really Eric Cantona appreciation.
Because I think the thing about Eric Cantona is that he's obviously cool, and I mean he had like the moves, like the collar, the way that he carried himself, the chest, the way that he played football, and you see quite a lot of footballers like that. Like Thierry Henry was a different version of that. But the thing about Cantona was he represented some values beyond that, beyond just the value of being cool for the sake of being cool, which is itself is something that is worth something, and beyond just being good at football, where he had a view of the world where it was important to do what you felt, to rebel against authority, to tell people if they were stepping out of line. And what I guess I've kind of seen a bit more as I've grown up is the kind of left-wing politics that also is something that I hold dear to my heart, that is inspirational. And he was someone who was prepared to stand up and make those points, whether it was about the way that you should speak to people who are foreign, or whether now it's about the way that football should be organised and structured. And I mean, he did that interview recently with the Players Tribune. Was it the Players Tribune? I think it was, which is quite wide-ranging in how he sees the world and how he thinks the world should run. And again, quite inspirational. And you see it doesn't happen very often where you see sportsmen who represent something beyond proficiency at sport. But Eric Cantona was one of those people, and I think that is why you see the way that he is still revered by United fans in a way that Cristiano Ronaldo, who was the best player in the world at the time that he was at United, and also was instrumental in United winning 3 league titles in a row and a Champions League, people don't conceive of him in the same way because he's just a bloke who's good at football, and perhaps guilty of some more nefarious stuff that we didn't know about at the time, but he didn't really represent very much beyond himself and footballing genius, whereas Eric Cantona represented an attitude, an approach to life, and actually some principles. And especially when you look at football now and you see no principles whatsoever, the way that he carried himself resonates even more profoundly than it did then.
Just to talk about Cantona for a minute, one of the things that seemed to resonate most was that he didn't live in a mock Tudor mansion, if memory recalls, that he was kind of in a 2 up, 2 down somewhere in an estate around Manchester. Is that right, or is that, again, part of the mythology and mythos that's been built up around him?
I'm not sure that's the case. I mean, obviously, where footballers lived in the early 90s was slightly different to where footballers live now. So he probably didn't live in somewhere outrageous just because they weren't making the kind of money at that point that enabled them to live somewhere outrageous, and particularly for him, who'd had a checkered career. So although he was sort of coming to his peak when he was at United, it wasn't like he'd been earning loads of coin prior to then, because he hadn't been playing for a bit, and he'd been at Marseille, and he'd been at Nîmes, and then he'd been at Leeds. So he hadn't just been accumulating in the way that other footballers of that time even then might have done. So I'm not sure he lived on an estate. That sounds fairly unlikely, and I hadn't heard that before. But it's not so much about that, like football, because one of the things that is difficult in the way that people can talk about footballers is that you often get middle-class press who are uncomfortable with and can't conceive of working-class footballers earning money. There's nothing wrong with people who are working class, who are socialists, doing well for themselves and earning money. Like, they're allowed to enjoy their wage. The difficulty and to make the most of their talent, and the difficulty comes when people perhaps forget where they came from and lose touch with who they are and lose touch with what the priorities in their life should be. And Eric Cantona was someone no one could ever accuse Eric Cantona of doing that. And so it's not about whether he lived on an estate or in a 2 up, 2 down, or he didn't live in some ridiculous footballer's mansion somewhere in Cheshire. It's that even if he did, and it doesn't matter whether he did or not, because if he did, then he'd earn the right to do that. It's that he never forgot what was important, and he never forgot what important values are. And important values are helping people and looking after people who are in the most trouble, and never being racist, never being xenophobic, never being homophobic, all of those things. And that's what Eric Cantona represented. And he played football like a person who represents all of those things, who never lost touch with the supporters, and who, when all the commercialism became a bit too much, he called it a day.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was kind of the point I was making, that he lived amongst the people that he chose to represent, as opposed to putting himself behind bars in a gated community and keeping away that way. Just to go back to the football, because I think that might be a little bit underappreciated. The season he comes back from the suspension, he comes back too late to influence things. Is that right? It's the season after that where they win.
So he comes. No, it's that season. See, he's suspended from January the 25th, 1995, until I think October the 1st, 1995. And so United lose the league to Blackburn by a goal, and they lose the cup final 1-0. And then he comes back and they chase down Newcastle. And
so 95-96 is the season he comes back from suspension, and they win like 8 or 9 games 1-0 at the end of the season, and he scores the winner in 7 or 8 of them. Is that right?
He scores. They win. They come back against QPR. Actually, the first game is they beat Newcastle 1-0 after they get pummeled in the first half. Schmeichel keeps them in it, and then Cantona scores 1-0. And that's kind of the definitive "you'll never win anything with kids" game, because that's what the season became known as "you'll never win anything with kids" season, the Alan Hansen season. But really, in the class of '92, will tell you this as well. That season, that championship and that double weren't won by kids; they were won by grown-ass men. Those men being Schmeichel, Cantona, and Keane, and they had the class of '92 able to play around them. But without those three, United don't win anything, and it was those three who were the reason why United won what they did. But there was the Newcastle game that they won 1-0. Then they came back in the last minute. Cantona scored about 5:30 against QPR to get them a draw. And then they won 1-0 against Arsenal with Cantona scoring, Spurs with Cantona scoring. And then they beat Leeds 1-0 as well when Keane scored, when Radaby was in goal. And it took them the best part of 80 minutes to score past Lucas Radaby. But and then obviously the cup final again was 1-0 in Cantona. But it was that ability that he had was timing. And when you talk about footballer having timing, you're often talking about their ability to turn up in the right place at the right time. And he had that. But what he also had was the timing that when you most need something, Cantona was that person who was able to do that. And not every player has that. And when you break him down as a player, he had most of the attributes, not really the attributes that you always associate with a number 10, in that he didn't just make nice passes, but he scored quite a lot of goals. He was great in the air, and he was also exceptional at one-on-ones.
Yeah, at the speaking event, he spoke about his relationship with Alex Ferguson and how after he'd been banned for the Kung Fu kick, he went back to France and he stayed around the training setup for a while, but then he left because he knew it was such a long ban and he thought he was going to retire. He thought he was going to walk away from it then. And he said how Ferguson travelled of his own accord and found him in France and had a dinner with him and convinced him to come back and to stay training. And when he returned to the team, he was well off the pace, he said, but Ferguson trusted him, and he played him and played him and played him and played him, and it was really, he really emphasised his respect for Ferguson during that interview, you know, and how he spoke so highly of Ferguson and their relationship. It was really nice to hear.
When you think about it now, if somebody was to jump into the crowd and do that to a fan, the chances of them coming back to play football within a 2.5, 3, 4 year, 5 year period are pretty limited. It was a very of the moment suspension, because the outcry would have been like, you can just imagine how there would be 5 weeks of hand wringing and just general outrage from people, because it would be gift straight away. Everybody would see it. The whole world.
This
would be
day and
like,
age.
Yeah,
the age of outrage.
If you did it now, exactly in the age of outrage.
There was quite a lot of outrage then. In fairness, I remember the day after, like driving around with my dad and after school, and the phone-ins were about Cantona and kick him out of the country and this, that, and the other. And I mean, it does. I mean, perhaps people would be even more outraged. Although I remember that Patrice Evra got into a rut with a fan last season, didn't he? And not that much happened. I mean, Jamie Carragher chucked a coin into a crowd a few years ago, which seemed to me like a far more dangerous thing to do, and also indiscriminate.
Yeah,
that you don't know who you're going to hit. But Cantona made sure he hit the right bloke at least.
The other great, sorry, Dan. The other great thing
is that if you think about the footballers who people love the most, and not just United footballers, Diego Maradona is another one, Roy Keane, what they have is, aside from being really good at football, which lots of people are, they have attitude. And football is a fast, combative, compelling, confrontational game, but one that you can look really fucking cool while you're doing. And Cantona basically brought together all of those things. He brought together the workers element. He brought together football's a socialist game really as well, because it's a team game and everyone has to pull together in the same direction. Cantona represented that. It's a rebellious, revolutionary activity against what the physical body can do, what a group of people can do when you put them all together. And all of those things were encapsulated in and represented by Eric Cantona. And that's why people were so attached to him, and that's why people still sing his name now, because he did all of those things while being very good at football. And you get other people who are good at football, and it tends to be now these days, if we look at who the best players are in the Premier League, Eden Hazard, Kevin De Bruyne, David Silva, Sergio Aguero, great players, but what else do we know about them? What else is interesting about them? What else have they done in their lives apart from be brilliant at football? And all they have to do in their lives is be brilliant at football, be true to themselves, be the people that they are. But I'm not criticising them as people for that. It just doesn't make them interesting to us. And that's the difference between someone like Eric Cantona and other players. Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, Xavi. They just represent footballing brilliance rather than ideas about things beyond football.
It's funny, I don't know if anybody is allowed to represent ideas beyond their sport in any sport anymore, because you get the media training at 16 as part of your academy training, and then your agent comes in and says, don't say anything that might alienate potential sponsors or sponsors of teams you might want to go to or other teams. And suddenly it's like, well, I'm not going to say anything because it's going to cost me money. So I don't know if there's a generation of footballers who are ever going to be able to do that again, or want to do that again, or be capable of doing it again.
That's kind of true, but then you look at, like Michael Jordan said, Republicans still buy sneakers. But then you look at what Colin Kaepernick's doing and lots of other American football players, and that cost him his career. You see Juan Mata's doing his common goal thing, and somehow not one single one of his teammates has decided that they should join in with that. But there are things that you can do, and I agree, it's difficult. So I mean, when Robbie Fowler wore his shirt in support of the Dockers, another brilliant gesture, he got into trouble with it, and it is difficult when you start bringing football into politics, except when you start bringing politics into football, except the fact that doing nothing is also a political gesture. And football is full of politics when you look at states buying football teams and when you look at the inherent what it means when one country competes against another country, when one landmass with a border competes against one landmass with a border, that too is politics. And so I'm not criticising people that choose to stay out of politics, because they're entitled to do whatever they like. What I was saying was that people that do get involved, and the two examples from England, Eric Cantona and Robbie Fowler, people love them for it, and people love them for it with good reason, because the things that they've done are important, and they're trying to make our world a better place. And really, that's what football's about in the first place, and that's how football started, was workers trying to enjoy their lives more and creating clubs for people, for like-minded individuals, to enjoy time together by doing this amazing thing called football. And
then it got ruined. Are Man United going to be okay tonight against Young Boys?
Probably. I mean, you wouldn't be surprised if they managed to make a mess of it, because they play badly so often, and particularly at home. So you're never quite sure what you're going to get. But Young Boys aren't very good, and they beat them so comfortably at home that they'd have to play exceedingly badly not to be able to get a win. So I don't know. But again, we're back in this situation with Mourinho where you're thinking, what are you looking for in your team? Because he left Lukaku out, or Lukaku got injured, whichever of the two it was, maybe both. Played Sanchez up front. They played really well against, not really well, they played pretty well against Everton. They played really well in the second half against Bournemouth. They played well for 20 minutes, half an hour against Juventus, stayed in the game and managed to beat them. And then he carried on playing those without Lukaku at Manchester City, where they got a doing, fair enough, but they were going to get a doing whoever they were played, just because City are way, way better than they are. And then he brings Lukaku back, and I'm not blaming Lukaku for United's inability to create decent chances, but it doesn't help, and it's just another example of Mourinho's not seeming to know where he's taking this team. Because you take him in one direction, then someone doesn't play well for a game, and then you take them out again. And meanwhile, Matic plays badly in almost every game. He's still there. How bad can Fred be? You spend 50 million quid on someone and you don't give them an opportunity to prove that they're not worth 50 million quid. And we're seeing with Victor Lindelof, who's got injured now, and that is a problem for United. As soon as he's had a run of games, he's got better and he's stayed in the team. And Victor Lindelof had far worse experiences playing for United at the beginning than Fred had, and is a centre-back, so a position where things can go a lot more wrong than they can when you're in the middle of the midfield. But for some reason, he refuses to play Fred, is playing Matic, is playing Lukaku, the guys that he likes, and is dropping various others after 45 bad minutes, 60 bad minutes, or whatever it is. And it's not just swapping players in and out, it's swapping systems in and out, so that you never get the continuity. And at some point, he just needs to decide, this is the team I'm going to play, and just stick with them, because that will be better than the constant changes.
Daniel, great stuff. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Nice, see you again.
Daniel Harris there talking to us about the heady days of Eric Cantona being the most important footballer in England.
Well, one of the great stories that he probably forgot to mention was that great statement he gave after he did return. And he spoke about that in the Olympia, and he's, you know, the seagulls followed the trawler, they expect fish. He said, I just made it up on the fly. And I left the press conference immediately and didn't answer any questions. And he said, when I got home, he said Roy Keane was calling me and we were just laughing about it. So that was another cool moment for Eric.
Was that the Man United team that you fell in love with, or had you already been a Man United fan?
No, I'd been a fan, yeah. I can't remember. I think he might have been in the team. I think it would have been around 92 or something, you know, when I was a kid in school.
Yeah.
All my friends supported United, so
I
just followed the bandwagon.
That's how it works. And then, you know, life was great for a long time, and all of a sudden now you see what the rest of us have had to endure for.
See who the real fans are now.
Yeah, exactly.